motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
Today's episode is called Different Spokes for Different Folks. Cruisers, sport bikes, dual sports, dirt bikes. There's a lot of options when it comes to choosing your ride. You could try one out, discover it's absolutely not the right fit for you, and you may start out on one type and move on to something completely different down the line. Our lives operate in a similar way. Society can create a belief within us that there's a certain mold or type of life that we should be living and slot into. We can get caught up in trying to make it work. Even when we know something isn't quite right, we override what's actually calling us and turn away from our authentic selves, often for the sake of trying to belong. On this episode, we celebrate the fact that life is all about having different spokes for different folks. We'll talk individuality, why we shouldn't lean away from what resonates with us, and how to tap into your true self. This is The Motivation.
Well, hey there, Chrissy. Not
Hey.
Not 100% sure exactly what and how I want to kick this off because so much is running through my brain. But as a early childhood educator, and my first memories of when my individuality or my thinking for myself kind of first comes into question, it's when you're a kid, really. So it's understood that about 3 years old is when we start taking other people's opinions of ourselves or other people's ideals for what we should be doing, how we should be behaving, how we should be showing up. This is when it starts to switch and we start to have this understanding that there is this expectation and that there's other people's emotions surrounding it. It's also the time when a child, human being, I'm just going to say a human being, has autonomy, when they start to understand they're an individual. So it's kind of this super ironic time of a human being because you're finding out that you're actually separate from your mom and your dad and your brothers and everything. But then you're also aware of everyone else's expectations of you and that there's some pretty intense consequences if you don't show up in this exact formation. And you think of going through school, any type of sports, just your parents, just expectations. It's just constantly about expectations. And God forbid you show up in a way that makes anybody feel uncomfortable or squirrely. You'll be rejected very cleanly and quickly. So much of your identity gets kind of swallowed up by fitting into society's bubble. Now, this is obviously different, culturally speaking, because where you grew up in the world. But we're trained to kind of show up as, yeah, be yourself so long as it's enjoyable to me. But anything past that, shut that shit down real quick. And as we get older and you start to even get as a teenager and you start to rebel and you start to push back and you start to be like, I don't know, this growing up thing seems to be like a real trick, which it is. Don't ever do it. I'm a firm believer.
All a lie.
Yes, all a lie.
We also all don't know what we're doing, but continue.
Yeah. Like we pretend that we do, but when we go home and you're with yourself, you're quiet with your thoughts, 99.999% of us are going, I really am just kind of shooting from the hip on this. And to be honest, I think more of the point is just to shoot a little bit more from the hip. Get real lost in yourself. And that's how you find yourself. But when we use this example of finding your ride, finding your bike, and just that there's so many different options. And each of these bikes you had different sitting position, a different comfort level. Then you add in modification, there's all that. But more or less, every bike is for a different style of riding. It's for a different adventure. And every rider, even though we have that in common, everyone has a different desire for what the kind of journey they want or adventure they want, sort of thing. And like we say too, that does and will change over time. But it is such a parallel with life because so often we have an idea of what we think we want. And then we're doing it and we're just like, none of this feels right. Rather than saying, is this really what I'm supposed to do? Or is this really is this box that I'm told I'm supposed to check really the equation to my happiness? No, half the time we go, there must be something wrong with me. I'm checking this box. I'm on this bike that everybody else looks really badass on, or they say is their dream bike. I'm riding it, not my dream. I feel like I'm going to crash every 2 seconds. But we, rather than it being like, hey, maybe this is not my bike. Hey, maybe this is not my path. Hey, maybe this was never a box I was supposed to check in the first place. We turn around and go, I'm probably not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not worthy enough. I'm not all these different things. And rather than second guessing the learned behaviors of somebody that fucking has no clue who I am, hasn't met me, but I'm taking their word for my life, which is outlandish. I'm looking rather at myself going, you're just not up to par, Kingwell. And it's ridiculous.
It is absurd, but Lori, you talking about all our early formidable years, it's exactly as you say. We are trained for that. And what I find so interesting, when I was in my early 20s, all of a sudden, once you get through that teen rebellion, there is that mental shift in your brain. And I call it the life script TM. We all of a sudden start subscribing to, here is the life that you will live and equate to happiness. Step 1, finish your education. Step 2, meet a man and have him court you, or woman. And then you move on to get the house. Oh, now you need to have 2.4 children. Make sure there's a white picket fence. And people have two problems with this. Number one, you don't check all those boxes. And as you say, now all of a sudden are walking around in this life where you've labeled yourself as inadequate. Or B, you check all the boxes and have that little inkling deep inside where you start to think, this doesn't feel right. I'm supposed to be happy though. I did all the right things. And it's like we're sold this remedy. It's like being sold the wrong bike, as you say, where all of a sudden you're on and the salesperson's like, but this looks great on you. And inside you're like, but this doesn't feel right. But then you feel the pressure and now you've signed on the dotted line and off you go. And then you're not living authentically, riding authentically. And that's never going to fix within yourself. If you don't step back and have a moment of self-awareness, you might just keep digging the same recipe and checking more boxes, trying to fulfill something inside where really the primary issue is you're not being true to yourself.
Yeah. I was stubborn enough, I was stubborn enough as a kid. I always had this inkling as a young child. And I think that's led me to be why I'm an advocate for children to this day, and why I always felt such a close connection to children and almost like protecting their authenticity and almost protect them from the adults. Even though I came in as an educator and as an adult, that still was like, this makes me uncomfortable. You need to change, child. You need to behave better because you're making me uncomfortable. So I went through, a decade. I've done it for 20 years now. But when I was a child, I was a stubborn child. I remember having these clear moments of when adults, and I was like, you have no idea what you're doing. Like, I remember that being like, I know you think that you know what I should be doing, but I feel very differently in a way that you can't articulate as a kid. You don't have the understanding, the vocabulary, you don't have the awareness, but you still have that spirit inside you that's going like, I don't know. Feels like you're crushing a part of me that, as much as you love me and your intentions are there, but this doesn't feel right. And I was just stubborn enough that I just kept pushing through. And I'm not talking about being that wily child that, is destructive and is just harming people. But I was always the why kid. I was the kid, but why? Tell me why. And the parent or adult, because I said so. That's not enough for this kid. Nope. They're going to have to come up with something better than that. And rightfully so. That you should have a reason why you're saying no to me. Because if you don't have a solid reason why you're saying no to a child or a person, then why are you saying no? Why are you telling them that that's how they have to show up? That's how they have to be what they need to be, or they need to, again, check these boxes. But so much of it is we just say, well, no, that's what you do. But why? Because that's what a woman does, or that's what a man does, or that's what you as a 20-year-old, like how many times is it like, well, it's talked about go to school, you get the good job, you find your partner, you marry them, you have the kids, you do all those things. And some people, that is what life they've lived, and that makes them so incredibly happy. But I know a lot of people that have done those, checked those boxes, and they're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. Here I am. I love my kids. At the end of the day, I'm going to lean into this as best I can. But like, if I could do over, there's no way I would have chose this for myself. Because in a lot of ways, it feels like you never really did choose it for yourself. You just kind of trusted the people that had your best interest because they did. They loved the hell out of you, but they were indoctrinated the same way you are now. And I was just happy to be stubborn enough that I was like, nope. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I listened to this guttural feeling rather than the boxes. And the more people told me to check the box, the most I was like, I'm going to burn that box. I'm going to take a grenade to that box.
Well, if you don't, you live a life where there's that deep-seated internal battle that you're not going to be able to rectify. As I've entered my 30s, I've really reconnected with who I am as a person. I think your 20s is such a wonderful decade of your life to really learn a lot about yourself if you're listening. And at any point in life, we have the ability to say, yeah, I'm not living my life in the way that I am. Or maybe you went a path and all of a sudden think, this isn't who I am anymore, because we are allowed to mold and change. It's so funny to me that as human beings, we spend so much of our life so focused on belonging and sameness and trying to compare ourselves to other and follow their path because that reassures us for some reason that we're doing it right or we're doing it okay. Simultaneously, we are these human beings that are so complex. I mean, I know that you have done quite a bit of self-studying, Lori, about our neural pathways and how our brains work and the connectivities and new connections that can be made. There's so much we haven't even discovered or tapped into through our own abilities. And yet we deny ourselves even exploring that in the slightest capacity for that desire to be like, I'm doing fine if I'm doing it right or following the formula. And you're robbing yourself of living a life that is a true creation of yourself. One of the things that I love most is looking at other creative beings in our community and seeing what they put out there, because it becomes this tremendous mosaic of what life should be. It's like a playground with vibrant colors. Why would you live your life in black and white? But I think a lot of people don't allow themselves to even open up the crayon box and see that there's endless amounts of options and you can blend this and that. We just get stuck into this full mold. And I mean, I've even met people in their later years in life, or it's one of the number one regrets when people are nearing life's end, is that they haven't tapped into who they were at all because they were so busy caring what everyone else was thinking about what they were doing. But at the end of the day, most people are so involved in their own mind, worrying about themselves. They're not looking at you and thinking you're doing it X and Y. We spend so much of our life concerning ourselves, though, that is why we decide to stay in a mold, because we're so afraid what X and Y will say if we show up exactly as we are. Why aren't we asking ourselves the question, if there were no consequences, who would I be? And then explore, what are those consequences? Can I live with that? Will I be happier? And you start to shed the layers. And if you start to lean into that direction, absolutely you will be. Because how can you tap into that true essence of happiness if you aren't even able to show up for yourself as yourself?
When you talked about the mosaic that we are as a community, but the mosaic that you are even as an individual, really, you're this one and only, one time only recipe. There never will be, there never was a you, there never will be another you. There is only you. This is just how it is. The concoction of who you came into this world as, all the experiences and learned behaviors and people you've been exposed to and adventures, and in some ways your traumas and all of it. Like, you are this one incredibly individualized concoction of you. And so often we're looking on the outside of ourselves for the recipe. And then we're going, because if I add a little of this, if I add a dash of this Instagrammer, and if I add a dash of this girl that I know that's super badass, and if I add a dash of this person that's doing this in the world, and then I'll be, and it goes, here's the thing. You can take inspiration from people. You could say they live boldly. That woman lives courageously. That man lives independently. That person lives with compassion. You can take the inspiration from their essence, But then you have to say, if I was courageous and I listened to a part of me, what would that look like? And that's how you start to live more in your authentic self. It isn't looking at someone's who they've baked into baking and cooking. I'm using a lot of cooking references for a motorcycle podcast.
I'm here
this
for
is,
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We all like to eat. We like to stop off our bikes and fuel up with food.
Should be using modifications metaphor. And I'm just like making the jankiest metaphors ever. But essentially what I'm trying to say is that this is where you have to really stop to start to listen to a centered self of what it is that makes up you and how incredibly, like everyone says, my story doesn't matter. I'm not that interesting. I'm not that. Everyone's not looking to be entertained by you. That's not the point of you as a person. It's you, your authentic story is enough. That is interesting. That is fascinating in itself. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have just your story. We're creating a podcast, for the love of God, around stories of people that don't think that their story is anything special. So we think it's special. Start to tap into the stubbornness of yourself. That when someone says to you, that's not going to work out, that's not going to make it, that's a stupid idea. Why would you do that? Oh, thank you so much, wasn't looking for your opinion on it, but here it is. And just get stubborn enough to just keep doing it. Honestly, that is what's allowed me to do half of the things that are really scary or that people think or have been judgy on or all these different things. And by all means, I'm the furthest thing from immune to falling into certain areas in my life where I start to look a little too closely at to who and what are doing things outside of me and start to want to impersonate that and then realize very quickly, what you doing, Lori? What you doing? Take the core beauty out of what maybe someone's doing that inspires you, but utilize just what I spoke to earlier. When Dave and I first started dating, we were dating long distance and everyone said long distance doesn't work. In my previous relationship, that wasn't the only reason, but long distance did not work. But I was very much had switched to the mindset of like, you really got to just do you and you have to just give it your all without adding in the ingredients from someone else's experience. Because that's when, the recipe goes off. Here, I'm back to cooking. And when Dave and I started dating, we both were very much like, we're going to figure out what this looks like between the two of us. Now, keep in mind, we're in Canada and I was moving to Hawaii in a month at the beginning of our relationship. Hawaii didn't end up happening, but I was like on my way and we were going to somehow make this new relationship work. But we were just like, why not? Long story short, we still did long distance for the first 6 months and there was all these different things, but we would say the saying of we're doing it our way. We would constantly say that we are doing it our way so that we're always in that headspace of not taking in other people's perspective as our own or their lens as our own and letting that interfere with what could be if we just come in as individuals, because that's the thing. I'm an individual. He's a complete individual. We together are a very individual relationship. So how could we take in information from other people on how it was going to work out when it's never technically been done before? Because no one's ever been me. No one's ever been him. And we've never come together before like this. And I ended up getting him this, like a bracelet with, what would it be? DI, whatever the abbreviation is for doing it our own way. English is not my forte. Anyways, he still wears it to this day. We're 14 years in and he still wears this. And we have done this in every decision we have made. And I mean, every decision. And there's so many decisions on paper that everyone was like, what are you guys doing? You will never make it. You will never make it. We have done, thank you so much. Tip my hat to your advice. Moving on. And we have an exceptionally high functioning quality relationship, exceptionally. And I genuinely give it credit to from the get-go. We have never pigeonholed either as individuals or as a couple, each other or ourselves into expectations that are outside of our individuality. So there has been so much room to just grow and be ourselves and figure it out without going, you're not good enough. You're not this, you're not that, or I'm not this. You know what I mean?
your relationship or relationships in this instant can be a great example, is the fact that to have a relationship sustain healthily in a healthy manner through all those years, you also would have had to embrace the fact you're not the same person that you were when you met Dave, and vice versa. You're two individuals, I'm sure, that have leaned into who you are, but you
Oh,
can't expect
hell
to be the
yeah.
same individual. Just like how, as we said in the beginning, you may all of a sudden decide this ride doesn't work for me and decide to change your ride. And it's knowing that and accepting that and making the decision and moving forward and promising yourself that you're going to continue to do that throughout your entire lifetime, because you hope that you're not going to be the same person you were a decade prior. The whole game is to grow. The whole game is to grow into who you are. Who you are isn't always who you are to be right now. And that's the beauty. You're living out all these experiences and adding to yourself and inviting those in. And yeah, you are going to be, to a semblance, following a certain path. But if you decide, hey, that path, I don't feel like walking it anymore, you can decide to swap it out and follow what feels right. But a lot of the times we deny that for ourselves because we think we have to go in that direction. And it's not even a matter of thinking that's the only way. I think it really does come down to being so concerned with what external forces will think if we decide to change paths. And Lori, that's one part that I love, love, love about our moto community, because it's this very interesting dichotomy where specifically we ride with a group, the Litas. They're a global collective, which I find incredibly impressive, knowing it started so small and expanded around the world with the same mindset of it doesn't matter what you ride, doesn't matter who you are, what your interests, all are welcome. And my personal experience has been that has always remained to be true. I have never encountered a group of individuals that are so encouraging over people celebrating and being their authentic selves. That really is what the community is. I have met some of the most fascinating individuals and had some of the most interesting and really educational conversations. And I mean educational, not like they were like, did you know in 1895, blah, blah, blah. I mean educational about life. And even just taking my brain in a direction that I didn't even think to explore, of a way of living. And that's what I mean when I talk about connections and possibilities. And that is what our moto community really cultivates. And I think that's really what got you and I thinking of celebrating and bringing this message out through this podcast, because I know, and I've always felt really connected with my inner voice. I don't even know how else to explain it. I remember even as a little kid, that voice in your mind, I always really was connected with that oneness and that inner. But you do get distracted in life because of how society decides to tell you to go. And exposing myself to individuals that are really leaning in ultimately have helped me lean into myself as well. When we launched on International Women's Ride Day, I was beside myself with a heightened anxiety as well, because you're lifting a curtain over another layer of who you are that's showing up in a very real fashion. But the main thing that we said going into this is that our community will find us. We're not aiming to appeal to everybody, because that's another part you have to accept. When you decide who you are, not everyone's going to love that. And that's okay, because those people will find their people. Like, you shouldn't be seeking validation from others at all. And to be honest, the ones that are going to give you that affirmations that you're in the right direction, those are your people.
Yeah. That fear factor, man, of rejection. We're wired to be part of something. We've talked about that before, but we're wired to want to be accepted and be a part of others. And there's experiments done with babies and their mothers where the mother goes neutral when the baby's giggling, and then the baby starts to try and giggle more to make the mother mirror that. And then when it doesn't, the baby starts to cry. It's the hardest experiment to watch, but that's how much it's wired within us. But you have to keep in mind that there is something bigger at play here. For a long time, a lot of really powerful humans have been very successful at creating industries around that need to fit in, and created this machine that is to pull you further away from self, the further need of acceptance, and everybody else being like, you either in the box, or if you're not, then I can't help you. That's what it's like. I can't help you. I love you, but I can't be out of that box. I'm not strong enough for that. And everyone's like, why can't you just, and you have to know going into it almost. You have to know. And that's why I say you almost have to be stubborn in it itself, not hardened. Don't let it harden you. I made that mistake. I let it harden me. I let that kind of thing of like, yeah, you really, I always quote Brene Brown, that soft front, hard back. And the stubbornness in the hard back is you keep walking through, and you do not let anything stop you, or anyone's opinion of you, or anyone's, but you can still do it with grace, and you can still do it with compassion and empathy for the person on the other side that wants so wholeheartedly to reject you on it when you step into yourself. But you have to remember that it's not actually them. It's not their spirit that's rejecting you. It's their learned behaviors. It's the part of them that is under the mirage that if they do A, B, C, and D, then that equates the happiness. And you have to know that there will be pushback, but if you can change the way you see that pushback, doesn't feel good, doesn't make it less, but you can move through it so much quicker. Like when Christy spoke about feelings of the podcast, I had those same anxiety moments, but I have been, I guess, training in this, if you will. I don't know how else to describe it, but like constantly in this state of like feeling that fear and letting it go through me rather than trying to control it, push it away, harden myself to it. And Chrissy is really good at this as well. And so this is the kind of thing that made it so much easier to then refocus on like how good it feels to be doing something that feels really true to yourself and really true to like a higher commitment to purpose of like being there for one another and being part of a community and connection. When we constantly go back to it, the why, you're going to have moments where someone, knocks you off a little, your balance as to your why. But the clearer you are on why you're doing what you're doing, or the more practice you have about stepping into yourself, you stumble a little. You might fall on your ass at first, but then you only get a little off balance. And then you get to the point where I'm hoping one day that I'm so solid within it that, if someone comes, all I do is want to hug them. You don't even knock me. You just fall into my embrace. And I'm like, come here.
It's kind of like learning to ride though. Honestly, I started in a parking lot, and I can tell you, I was not a natural. It's not something that comes instantly to me. No. I've never been that type of learner. I actually need to understand mechanically why 100%. And how things are happening. And, those first cones just seem like the most obscene thing to turn around. And then before you know it, it does get easier. And it's essentially the same for any of the tools that we share on this podcast. The more and more you put the work in, the easier it comes. And even if you have that moment where, I put 2 feet down at the stop when normally I would lean left, well, no big deal, because you know how to get up and keep going. You have those tools, but you just need to keep practicing. And when I was doing a little bit of research for the podcast today, I saw a little note in an article that just said, maintain alignment between what you feel and need with what you say and do. And so if we're constantly reminding ourselves of what we want to feel, what we need in our lives right now, and put actions into place within regards to what we're saying, how we're showing up, and what we're doing, that's going to lead you into identifying your authenticity, getting onto that path of self-actualization. Because it can be scary to peel back the layers, for sure, especially if you've spent years thinking or really knowing that you're not how you're living in a nutshell. Because I don't believe that anyone that isn't truly tapped into who they are, I think most of us know when the fit isn't right. Just the same as if you're on a bike where you're like, it ain't right. It doesn't fit me at all, but I'm just going to try and keep going. It doesn't work.
Perfect story about the bike thing that doesn't fit. I had this Moto Guzzi V7. A buddy of mine had it. He was selling it right when we moved to the city here. And it was a gorgeous bike. Oh, it was gorgeous. And I just loved it. So I just was in the headspace of, I love it. I'll look great on it. Let's do this. Well, come on. We need more than that for a motorcycle ride. I got the bike and I hadn't ridden in a couple years prior. So I was just getting back on the bike, pun intended, and literally. And I was, I started practicing in Stanley Park again to get the, tight curves and stuff practice up. I dropped the bike. I was a hot mess on this bike. I was scared shitless going sea to sky. And I was like, I am a terrible rider. What happened to me? I was just questioning everything about my riding. It just wasn't a good time. And I rode it for an entire moto season. And I kept going, maybe this isn't my bike. But it was so beautiful. And I also just didn't want to regret giving it up. And then, so it was like a relationship that it was time to break up with them. But you were like, I don't want anyone else to have them.
You're like, shit got toxic, but I'm holding on.
And you're like, yeah, but it looks pretty. So I finally came to terms that I need to move on from this bike. I went and sat on the bike that I have now, which is, good God, in my bike in every way. It's a Triumph Street Cup. And it was almost immediate where it was this is my bike. I think this is my bike. I went and gave it a test ride and I rode it only for 10 to 15 minutes. And I was just zipping in and out of traffic like it was a second skin. And when I bought the bike, got it home, I still had my Moto Guzzi. And I sat on my Moto Guzzi just to see the difference. I said, it feels like I just bought a cheetah and I'm now sitting on a moose. Because the way the seat flared out and just all these things, I was like, this was not my bike. It wasn't me as a rider. This wasn't my bike, but I had such an ideal, the Moto Guzzi V7 was my dream bike that I had Googled and saved pictures of. And I had it in my head that this is what I wanted. It was beautiful to look at. You have this other really shallow part of you that's oh, people will look at it and think, what a beautiful bike. And then I get to be like, that's my bike, that bullshit stuff that draws us into making life decisions that don't make us happy. What we're attaching ourselves to is some really surface shit. Now, the bike I have now is a gorgeous bike as well, but that's just the cherry on top. That's the littlest part of my concern. So much so that I haven't added any modifications on. And there are some dope mods that can go on. And I look forward to getting there that one day. But I'm just so enthralled right now with my ride that I keep forgetting to even think of that fun part.
Because you're enjoying the ride. That's the difference. Absolutely. You're so excited to get on the ride.
Absolutely. And the more that I have dug deeper into who I am as a person, what it is I'm doing and all those things, I've noticed certain really just other elements in life all around seem to just drop to the wayside that I used to really prioritize that just are a waste of my time and energy. Things shift and shit that I've spent time on now, 10 years from now, I'm going to look and go, yeah, not where your time needs to be. So it's ever changing and evolving. It doesn't mean you have to fall swoop who you are to step into yourself. It doesn't mean that I'm suggesting anyone just steps into their most authentic, best version of themselves. And they're just wow,
here.
Yeah. That'd be great if it was that easy, but it's just not. Actually, it wouldn't be great. We wouldn't actually learn a damn thing. You got to be really aware of what ride do you want in this life and ask yourself that. Start to really ask yourself more and more questions. I know we repeat that on a lot of our podcasts, but it is the crux of it all, is the foundation of it all. Because if you're not asking why it is you're doing what you're doing, you'll keep having the same results that you're having that aren't making you happy. And when you start to get real clear on what you're doing, you start to really uncover some really dope shit about yourself. So let your freak flag fly.
I think, Lori, it's that time for your motivation.
I can't even hit that note. There it is.
Just gave it my all. So, Lori, What's the tool du jour?
Yeah, manifesto. Every business has these mission statements, right? So that it keeps them on a clear, direct route of keeping true to what their goals are. And I think that we should all have manifestos that, this is something that I need to rewrite actually, and look at my older one, to be honest, but it helps me substantially to navigate when things come into my life. Is it an actual opportunity? Does it actually align with who it is I am, what it is I want out of this life, where it is I want to go, all those things, like that real intention. Because we look at everything as like, well, if it's offered to us, it's grab everything you get. That's not true. That's not true. Having something written where it's like, this is what I want to feel in life. This is what I want to be a part of life. These are my strengths. This is how I want to show up in my friends and family's lives. This is what I want to show up for myself. This is what I want to do when I feel fear. I want to feel courage. I want to feel this, so that when something like, example, our podcast comes up, those are the things that I look to and dig at to remind myself that it's like, you are going to feel this feeling, breathe it in and breathe it out. And then you step into the next, right? And it just makes it so much clearer than it feels like floating around, kind of wondering, is this me, or is this me, or is that me, or is, I don't know. And it's still going to be messy, and it's still an adventure. And the great thing about it is it's forever changing. So you can add things as you think to it, and you can evolve, and you might scrap it all and decide I wasn't even in the right direction with this manifesto. Great. Chuck it in the garbage. No shame in that game. But
that's why we have the opportunity to rewrite. Most of us know who we are on the inside. I mean, no one spends more time with you than you. No one gets to hear the inner narrative except you. But I think, and myself included at times in my life, and I'm sure in ways I show up today, so not alone, I think we don't let that out because we are scared. We are scared. We're scared of what that means for us, how our life will change, what people will think, as we've addressed throughout this episode. So the exact question that I included earlier today, I want you to take a quiet space and time and truly have a solid think. If there were no consequences, who would I be? Who would I be? And figure out, what is that worth to you? It's probably worth a lot to be who you are. Because once you start stepping into that, you're going to start attracting more into your life of things that resonate on the same vibrational level of who you are in that moment. And it's okay. Know that whatever that is for you, it can change. Your story's going to change. That is the beauty. But blinding yourself into thinking that whatever boxes you've ticked is the only way, and because you've gone that way, it's the only way to keep going, that's not true. You know that's not true. So take the time and have a think. If there were no consequences, who would I be? And start leaning in that direction.
I think that's an amazing, amazing one, because it cuts right to it. Because really and truly, what's on the other side of our fear is our freedom. That is what's on the other side. And it's scary going into it, but there is nothing like the freedom that you feel when you get on the other side and do it anyway. Nothing.
Love it. That's what life is.
All right, let's do our quotes.
I'm excited for mine. I love this quote so much. I love it.
Let's hear
Dr. Seuss. Dr. Seuss. Can't go wrong with a little Dr. Seuss. We are all a little weird, and life's a little weird. And when we find people whose weirdness is compatible with ours, we join up with them and fall in mutual weirdness and call it love. And I just want to say, I love my Moto community and our mutual weirdness and leaning into exactly who we are. I do.
Amen. Mine's by Ralph Waldo Emerson. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. And folks, if you didn't know already, that is your motivation. You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.